Welcome to Doctor on Call with your host, Doc Griffin. The doctor will be with you momentarily. Our guest this evening is horror author Matt Dymerski. Caution, if you plan on watching this interview, it is advised waiting at least 30 minutes to allow proper digestion before going swimming. Doc Griffin, paging Doc Griffin, you're needed in the OR, stat.
And thank you very much, Nurse Cadet. Today, today's going to be a fun one for me because one of the fields that I have the utmost respect of is writers, authors, people who pull those nuggets of imagination directly from that cerebral cortex and put it down on a piece of paper and make it into a fantastic adventure that you can read, that you can delve into. The words coming to life. It's one of the amazing things that I love about not only reading but writing myself. And I believe today we do have someone coming on who is a great example of that. And without getting into any type of diagnoses, let's jump right into it. And welcome to the show, Matt Dymerski. How are you doing this evening, Matt? Oh, wait, I should say this afternoon.
Oh, yeah. It's afternoon here in New Zealand, and I'm doing great.
Awesome. Good to hear. Now, of course, for those of you who are not familiar yet with Matt's work, we do have his links down there, especially not only to the Twitter and to the Facebook, but also because of there's a lot of material to read on his Amazon authors page. I'm sorry, for some reason I seem to be tongue tripping. But I will say this, just to lead into it. One of the reasons why I wanted to get Matt onto the show was because I've been writing for about 40 years, and I really, for the 80s and the 90s, I kind of got tired of all the rejection slips. I continued to write, but I stopped submitting things, and I got onto the YouTubes. And I was listening around, and something hooked me in. Somebody told me, you'd really like creepypastas. You could write a creepypasta. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll go and check it out. And one of my first encounters with a creepypasta that was an audio adaptation was done by Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. And it was Matt's story entitled Psychosis. Now, I've got a late night show that I run, and every night for like the past 2 weeks, I've been saying, if you don't know who Matt Dymerski is, go listen to this. And I'd throw the link into the chat. So they could go and check it out. And I thought it was a brilliant piece. It was very much the kind of texturing that would get you into the story as a reader. So you could say that Matt was one of my inspirations for starting to hand in some of my fringe stuff, some of my horror stuff that eventually did get adapted. And so I wanted to thank him for that right up front.
Well, you're welcome.
And this is how I always do it. I want to know from the start. I want to know from the beginning. What kind of kid were you growing up, and where did you have your roots planted to start off?
Oh man, so all the way back would be Richmond, Virginia, living in the middle of a forest with a bunch of old neighbors, no kids around. So I spent my days wandering around in that forest, getting scared half to death by things like these burrs that are filled with holes. And like now people know that like things with lots of little holes in them is like a common phobia. But back then I'd be wandering around the forest and I'd see these little things on the ground and be like, oh, that is the worst thing ever. Like just scary at a fundamental level. But it got me thinking about like what else is out here. So I'd start thinking like in the middle of the afternoon, as evening's coming on in the forest, oh, what if there's like ghosts out here or zombies? And I'm like, wait, that's a really stupid way to start thinking when you're alone in the forest. But it was kind of fun. It
Well,
definitely
now,
started with that.
were you an only child?
No, I had a younger brother, about 4 years younger, uh, who we clashed a lot initially, but I think we both liked computer games and the internet, so we definitely got on the internet before I think most anyone else did that we knew, and immediately ran into things like Ted the Caver and those original creepy pastas out there, which is absolutely awesome.
Oh yeah. And did you come from a nuclear family, like having both parents around?
Yeah, I would say I was lucky to have the family stick together, and we even moved to Ohio a few years, like sixth or seventh grade. Lived there for the rest of my life. And Ohio is a great place filled with nice people. So I was very lucky to have a decent life with no overt tragedies.
Yeah, I'm a native of Ohio, and every time that I moved away, I always had a tendency of moving back.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I actually went away to college and I was like, you know what? Oh no, I transferred back to Ohio State. Just went right back to Ohio.
Now, are you talking about the Ohio State University?
Yes.
Oh, okay, not alcoholic university. OU.
No, not
Um,
OU.
so now, who would you say that you got your sensibilities from? Your mom, your dad, or was it a basic combination?
So I don't know if other families do this, but my family, we would sit around like the dinner table and we would talk about like science, like space and stuff like that, and science fiction and whatever questions we had. Because once a week we would sit in the living room and we would watch Star Trek whenever Star Trek: The Next Generation was on,
Okay.
and that continued all the way up through Star Trek: Deep Space Nine and even Star Trek Voyager. We would watch those things as a family. Of course, my brother and I'd be like, "What's this temporal anomaly?" And my dad would, he'd be like, "I don't know," but he would like be like, "Oh, it must be like a thing that changes time." Of course, that would like inspire us to think about things and ask tons of questions. So we were those kids who kept asking why until the adults just screamed, "Shut up!"
Now, and of course we'll get to the writing part in a bit, but you were talking about how the woods inspired you. Now, did you have any, excuse me, books or movies that did the same?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, besides Star Trek, I also watched the Twilight Zone, and the Outer Limits pretty religiously, like every single episode when those were airing. They were just the best time of my life, because I mean, you go into like elementary school or middle school, you're a kid, nothing matters, everything's boring, and then the Twilight Zone comes on, and it's just this complete next level of mentality and emotion and storytelling, and absolutely inspired by those.
Well,
Actually, yeah.
I have to ask, what was your favorite episode?
See, for the Outer Limits is the one I usually answer with first because it's lesser known, the Twilight Zone, and everyone knows the famous Twilight Zones. But for the Outer Limits, they had this episode where aliens were coming to Earth, and to sort of as an insurance policy in case anything went south, the government installed these people in different bunkers underground all over the world. The main character was this guy who was just a normal, average guy in the States, so it followed the American perspective. But they were supposed to push this button every so often that would go off at random. If they didn't press the button, all the world's nuclear bombs would explode and basically destroy the Earth, making it, like a poison pill so the aliens couldn't take it over. And the episode just followed him bonding with the other people in the other bunkers over televisions and like getting regular updates about what the aliens were doing. But like the weight of that responsibility on that one guy's shoulders, as each of the bunkers goes offline mysteriously one by one until he's left by himself underground, the only person still pushing the button to keep the Earth from being destroyed, not knowing what's going on up there. That's just like the darkest, bleakest thing I've ever seen. And I actually have written stories directly inspired from that, like a whole like feeling of just absolute like confusion and pain and loneliness, but there's still a driving force because nobody is without a driving force. So it's like, how do you make those decisions? How do you keep going?
I'm trying to think. Was that one Dead Man's Switch?
Yes, it was.
Oh, okay. My brain did not fail me. By the way, what did you think about when they tried to bring in the modern version? of Outer Limits and Twilight Zone?
I appreciate what they're trying to do. I see that they keep making mistakes, and so they getting themselves canceled. Like I like the individual episodes, but they keep with there's like 2 or 3 different revivals of each of these series, and as I watch them, I'm like, oh, I enjoy this, but then they get canceled because not enough people watch it, and I feel like they're making some simple mistakes that they didn't have to make, and I don't know. I just wish that they could last longer because it's still really good.
Is it kind of like and not to call anybody out, but Blumhouse films seems incredibly formulaic, where they have to have that Bagul jump scare at the very end.
Well,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
oh no. I was just gonna say. I mean, and we'll get to it as far as it affects you for writing, but does that make you disassociate a little bit more from what they're trying to do, because you can, as a writer, you can see the formula?
Actually, I really enjoy their attempts to bring modern horror and also science fiction in various cases to the modern audience, because horror is something that is very unique in terms of genre. It has to keep going. Like a horror story from 40 years ago is just no longer scary. It doesn't last like great literature. Only H.P. Lovecraft made timeless stuff. He is unique. He has got the powerful stuff from the 20s. But Blumhouse Productions and those other films, they're keeping horror alive. They're delivering it to modern audiences so that they'll grow up, thinking about horror and enjoying horror. I actually really appreciate what they're doing.
I do, except for when they follow obvious tropes. Because legitimately, you seen the movie Sinister?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought I thought Sinister was a good movie until it got to the very end and they had to put the jump scare in. They really didn't have to put that jump scare in, and it would have been far more effective. But they did the whole test audience, and people left on like a down note instead of that adrenaline punch.
So jump scares are a thing. Like I can't comment on how I feel about jump scares because it's like, yeah, you did a jump scare, like good for you. But the shit, what was like I say? No, I still really appreciate what they're doing because that's right. So they're tired tropes to authors and people who've watched every horror movie, but I don't think they're for us. I think they're for new people, and to new people who are new to the genre. This is like the scariest, craziest thing ever. Because for me, the first horror movie I ever saw was Troll 2, which
Oh
is
my.
like the infamously worst movie of all time. But to me, because I was 5 years old, it was the scariest thing I'd ever seen. And I was traumatized by this scene where goblins ate this kid's mom at the end of the movie, like the final jump scare. And it stuck with me for 15 years until I finally saw this movie on television. I was like, oh, wait, this is what I was scared of.
Yeah, if you have an appropriate gateway in, then it's definite inspiration. Like mine was, as a kid, I saw the movie called The Green Slime. Now, I don't know if you know about this movie at all. It was late 60s, early 70s. And it was just aliens through basically this alien goo got on some guy and it mutated into tentacled monsters that ran around a space station killing everybody.
Was it the big red eye, like goofy suits type?
Yes.
One? Yeah.
I've got it now. I went to the Warner Brothers library because it wasn't available anywhere. And you can actually buy from the WB library anything from their library. It costs you $20 to get a DVD of it.
Oh, wow.
And I purchased it and I got like 20 minutes into it and I'm like, what the hell was I afraid of? That movie scared the crap out of me. It was a great horror movie for a kid, but as an adult, you're kind of embarrassed looking at it. Now, as far as it goes, what was the first movie that you saw that, and I know all writers do this, that affected you to the point where it's like, you know what, I'd like to continue that story?
Oh, that's a really good question. Absolutely, John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness.
Wow. That's a beautiful movie. Um, uh, a lot of John Carpenter's movies get dogged out. And then you get them 10 years down the line and they're like, oh man, this movie was better than I mean, because they'll, I don't know what it is about critics, but if you're an artist or you're a creator, it seems like you just need to ignore them.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, and especially with the John Carpenter comment, because I loved all of his movies, and no one else had seen them, and critics said they were bad, and I just keep rewatching them. I show them to people, and they're like, "Wow, this is like really good," and I'm like, "I know, right? What was the problem back in the day? I don't know."
Yeah, I mean the only one that I really was like meh about, and I even like Memoirs of an Invisible Man, but I was kind of meh with the with Ghost of Mars. But
That's the only one I haven't seen.
Just to be a completist, yeah, sure, go ahead and watch it. But it's better with the commentary on, because that's where you start to learn how the studio was interfering with Carpenter. And that's the reason why he doesn't like to do movies anymore.
I actually watched a bunch of series recently about studio interference in movies and books, and I find that really strange. Like these execs who it's not their job to do this interfere and make things bad and make it worse, and just it's very strange. I don't understand why people are doing that to their own products.
Well, I think it's kind of like where, they're probably guilty of the first and maybe not so much of the second, but it's one of those things, especially when you're dealing with a horror genre, where they're trying to supplant what their fears are or what their perceived fears are. What needs to go in there, and then first and foremost, they're following along a list of tropes where, hey, this movie did $100 million and it had this, and this in it. I need to put this, and this in this one, and we'll make a lot of money out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my supposition on it. Now, is there any time where you got to the point where it's like, oh, if I want to do this, here's my formula? Because it seems to me your writing is more organic than it is formulaic.
I'm actually glad you noticed that, because I am a complete anti-formula writer. I will actually so I had this teacher. I took a writing class. It's basically the only writing class I ever took was at the Iowa Summer Writing Festival back in Iowa. Very, very top tier talents, great teachers. And it's funny because I actually live in New Zealand now, near this Paula Morris, who's an author herself. And I haven't contacted her because I feel like that would be weird. It's like, hey, I took a class from you. By the way, I moved to your country. But she taught me to start with that ending moment. Like, what's that final climactic scene of the movie or the book? And because that's always the thing people are left with. They're like, wow, oh wait, I was gonna mention like the Avengers, but I don't know like spoiler status on that, so I won't. But
no, we're good. This part of the neighborhood's already seen it.
Okay, so like the first Avengers, not Endgame, but the one before it, when Thanos did the snap and half of everyone disappeared, and that's the end of the movie. My girlfriend and I, we were sitting there like, what? That's incredibly ballsy. Like, you can't just end a movie on the bad guys winning. Like, half of everyone dies. That's incredible. So they obviously started with that moment, and they wrote the entire rest of the movie on the way up to that. And that's the way I write. I think of that ending moment, and I start with a set of characters. And I'm like, all right, let's just see where they go. And maybe like 30% of the time, they reach that endpoint I wanted, but I let the characters choose themselves and choose their own paths. Sometimes I end up somewhere completely differently, and I'm okay with a story even being bad or just not working out, because it has to flow. Like, I think the number one thing that breaks a story's immersion is when a character does something that doesn't make any sense, either for them or for the situation. You're like, why don't you just get in the car and drive away? you have to have either a compelling reason why they don't just drive away, or like something very clear, like, oh, that car doesn't work. Because if not, you get that situation where you're watching like a horror movie or reading a story, and you're like, what? Why don't you just leave? And then the rest of it's like, this is stupid. Like, what? Well, why are we still here? You know?
That's and that's one of the things that I try to impress on anybody who asks me any advice, is that if it's going to be organic, you can't force the fit. If the character is going to go off into if you fleshed your character out enough, if they become 3D in your mind, let them go, let them travel. Let's see where this goes. You mentioned that it usually ends up 30% of the time of what you think the ending's going to be.
Yes.
So you're constantly surprising yourself by the endings.
Absolutely. Actually,
And how does that play into your creativity?
well, it's very. It feels a little bit schizophrenic, actually, and I don't think I'm crazy or anything like that, but I do have extremely vivid dreams. So I wake up and I write down the dreams, and the pieces of the dreams, I literally just use those as is, because I don't know where it came from. It feels like it came from outside of me, like I discovered it in another universe or something. And so that feels more real somehow. And anything that descends from that, like, just feels extremely organic. And I like to mix that in with, like, oh, I should construct a character this way, because obviously after 10 or 15 years of writing, you know how to put together a cohesive character. So you combine the cohesive character with the elements of the dream and them making their own choices, and you get this story that it goes from start to finish, and I'm watching it like, what is this? Why am I writing this? And when it's done, I'm like, I don't know if it's good or not. And I give it to a friend or my girlfriend to read, or post it online. And some of them are stupid and everyone hates it, and some of them are great. I'm like, okay, I did a good job today.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I definitely like to bring up is the fact that have you ever read any L. Sprague de Camp and Fletcher Pratt? They did the series the Complete Enchanter.
Oh, like, sorry, could you repeat the name of that again?
Yeah, it's called The Complete Enchanter by L. Sprague de Camp and Fletcher Pratt.
I have heard of it, yes.
Okay. That's an amazing setup because they put in the supposition, and this was back, I think they wrote it in the 30s and the 40s. And they put together that essentially all the realities exist, and it's a multiverse. And when the writer is kind of like a Uatu, the Watcher in Marvel Comics, that when they go into their lucid state, when they go into their dreaming, they're actually going into another multiverse, and they're witness to whatever's going on there. Now, sometimes it can be mundane, sometimes it can be fantastical, but they said, essentially, the best kernels are coming from your imagination. But what if your imagination was actually on another plane in another universe, visualizing these things, and you're supposed to be the recorder?
Oh, I really like that concept. It's funny. I should actually read those, because literally right now I'm writing a story where a bunch of pissed off people go storming into the worlds of dream, looking for God. Like, does he exist? I don't know, but we're mad. We're going to find out. And it's an actual place where they're going. I should definitely read those books.
They are awesome. Their big thing was they wanted to go back into mythologies. So they actually go back to like Norse mythology. They go back to Celtic. They even get caught in I forget what the name of the Kubla Khan poem is. But they get trapped in that poem because the poem was never actually finished. So it just keeps repeating like it's a skipping record.
Is it a vision in a dream?
They actually go to those worlds.
That's awesome.
There's just some genius basic stuff there that I would love to steal if I thought that I could wrap my capable hands around it. But yeah, they did a lot of that. Well, you know what? Dreaming could be reality, and I find that fascinating.
I find it fascinating to think about where human cognition actually is, because the writing and stories and the process of tales, they've actually done MRIs on people, and when someone's telling a story, their brain lights up in a certain way, and the person that's listening, their brain lights up in the same way, which to me is a very powerful thing to think about, that what I am envisioning, you are also envisioning. And how specific is that? How exact is that? Like, we might never know if the actual thing I'm envisioning and conveying to you with words is literally what you're seeing, or if it's slightly different, or if it's not. But like, that's what language is sending actual thoughts, sending actual feelings to someone else, and they are receiving it because they want to. And there's just something very real about that.
And honestly, I do think it is a real talent for people to have the imagery in their head, just like an artist when he puts his pen down to the paper, they're
Yes.
able to translate it. I think that's an amazing step forward as far as human evolution goes. Because there are a lot of people out there who say, well, I have no words for this. And it's like, no, you need to have words for this. You need to be able to create that visualization either in words or, you know, from the brush stroke. I find that a lot of what thrills and fascinates me when I crack open a book, because you are the god of your universe. You're the one who sets down the rules and the regulations. I know, what was it? Tolkien took like 10 years before he wrote even a single word of Lord of the Rings, just because he wanted to have his world set first. I don't know if I could be that patient. Do you ever find yourself when you're writing becoming impatient, such as I need to write faster, or you know what, in order to make it feel better for me contextually, I need to veer off a little bit and write something about this as far as an explanation goes?
Oh, absolutely. So, for those that don't know, like, in addition to horror, I write this ongoing science fiction adventure series. Actually, it's at like 2 million words. I've been writing this thing for 5 or 10 years, and the continuity has gotten so intensely complex that I'm often playing with just completely changing the setting of like somewhere completely new characters entirely. And right now I'm writing the culmination of like an entire 1,000,000-word saga of the last things that happened. So every single sentence, I have to go back and read like 40 chapters of my own writing to be like, make sure this makes sense. Oh, would this character act this way? Oh, like what did they say to each other that first time they met? So like the actual time it's taking to write this is making my, seat of the pants writing brain go like, oh, can't we just like say that everybody dies and just go to the next story? But no, I can't do that.
And then you remind your subconscious that you are not George R.R. Martin.
Yeah.
But now I think it's an awesome thing that you're more of an organic writer, because like I was saying, that does show. Because I've run into several people who are like, well, this has to happen, so ergo here comes the stilted dialogue, or here comes the, why are you shoehorning this thing in?
No, my favorite is always that line about like, as you know, since you've been my brother for my entire life. Who would ever say that?
Yeah, I recently wrote a story where I was stealing some of the, I don't know if you ever watched the old Full Moon Trancers movies.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so I stole some of their verbiage. Like they're in Angel City, because I was doing like a futuristic noir piece, and I didn't bother to explain a damn thing as far as why they're using the word squid. or going down the line. I'm just like, you know what? If they pick up on it organically, that's good. Or, you get further pages away and you understand it. Do you think this is what leads into my question? Do you think that there are some authors out there that feel like they're obligated to kind of treat their audience stupid? Well, let's not say stupid. Let's say ignorant.
I never go negative on things because everyone's doing their own positive thing. But I will say that I absolutely love the style of just throwing people into the mix, and that engages a certain type of viewer. And I understand that like a studio or an editor might say like, oh, hey, you're writing to a mass audience here. You're going to have to explain this. But I personally love coming into a movie or a book halfway through because that cuts out any chance of the author just telling me what things are. And I have to guess as I read the story what's happening. That's the fun part. And I have watched movies like come in halfway through or come in like with 30 minutes left in the movie. And I'm like, that movie is incredible. And everyone else is like, what are you talking about? And I go watch the first part, and the first part's awful. I'm like, oh, I mean, like what I imagined was like really cool. So like you always imagine something that's more appropriate for you if there's holes left that you have to fill in.
Well, and I was told, I don't necessarily like his writing, but he's a very wise and sage because he lives around where I live, Garrison Keillor, and he's like, listen, I write all these stories, but it's an organic thing. It's kind of like how how it goes to natural erosion. A mountain will chip away, but it will actually the runoff will fill in the blanks, create the dams and stop the flooding. If you've got organic writing, that's essentially what it's going to do, because eventually if it's something that's really important, your writing's going to lead you over that terrain and you'll cover it. I think a lot of people who are starting out, who are budding writers, get tripped up on all this. That's why they go into, hey, I've got a 20-page outline. It's like, why? It's like just write. Oh, by the way, Politipod in the chat says, I love this man. He was one of the people where when I was discussing you on the late night show, he was like, yeah, I've listened to his stuff. So he was definitely looking forward to seeing you come in. And
nice.
I just have to say that Politipod, he is in a relationship currently, so you can love, just do it from a distance. But now that leads me into it. What was, and I'm always curious to know, the very first thing that you wrote front to back, that very first piece of work that you considered. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be a good work, but what's the first one that you had a beginning, middle, and end written?
The actual first fully complete story I ever wrote was actually Psychosis. I like telling this story because it is the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. So I've been writing my whole life, and I've written things for class. I love English class, so I've written like assignments, and they weren't really like anything cohesive or coherent that was mine. And I had like the earliest thing I ever wrote was this terrible I was 5, so I chose the game Diablo had this all caps Gothic font. So I wrote a full 2-page intro to a story in bold Gothic font that I still have somewhere. And it was so that would be the first thing I wrote, but it wasn't a fully fleshed out story. It was just the intro to a story. But Psychosis would be the first fully complete thing I ever wrote, because I sat down and I had just basically discovered the creepypasta.org or .com community when it was run by this girl, Sarah, in Ohio.
Uh-huh.
And I read just literally, instead of going to class, I was in grad school at the time. I just got into business school. I read 40 different stories in a row for 6 hours. I just sat in the computer lab of that building at the Ohio State University. And on the 40th or 50th story, my brain was charged up with this really weird, creepy electricity. Like everything was horrifying. Like the door to the PC lab would open and someone would come in. I'd be like, oh God, what was that? You know, like, or like look out the window and I'd see like a bird sitting there watching me. And I'm like, oh no, it's looking at me. You know, and that kind of like fully immersed in like just filled with the energy of creepiness. And right there in the PC lab, I wrote out the entire psychosis thing all at once based on my own experiences at the college I had transferred away from. And then I posted it and I just like, oh, you know, like completely drained, nothing scary anymore. All the energy is gone. And that was how that was created.
And I'll be honest with you, I'm having a hard time believing the fact that that was the first beginning to end, because it is an amazing piece of work. And you know,
thank you.
And my stuff, yeah, I will just say that the first things that I ever put out, not even close to that quality. Not even close.
Well, my problem was I didn't finish things, so I would write the first quarter or half of something, and I would just leave it. I'm like, I don't like this. I don't know. That was the first one I actually completed all the way through.
Well, and how important is it to actually finish?
Wow, I think it's so incredibly important. In fact, I actually struggle, I guess, with brain hard drive space, because all the stories I want to write build up in there, and they never go away. They continually get prompted again if I don't finish them. Like I see like a billboard in town, I'm like, oh right, I should write that story about that, you know, the astronaut, the billboard idea. And if I don't write it, those stories just build up in there, and I actually have to write the stories, give it an ending, and let it be done, so that it can finally go away, like be on the paper instead of my head. And so some weeks I will just sit here and write stories just to get them out of my head so I can stop thinking about them and start generating new ideas. I think it's really important to finish a story.
I'm completely with you on that, to where I get crowded and there's something that'll just set me off. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to write this piece out. I'll be honest with you, and I don't know how your writing structure is, but we'll jump to that with this question. Mark Twain and Ray Bradbury did it the same way. They would write on a story until they got bored with it, then they'd start another story, and then if they got bored with that, they'd go to another one. Mark Twain said he usually had 4 or 5 novels going all at the same time, or short stories. Ray Bradbury was about 24 going at any given time. Amazing guys. Do you think it's okay to at least get that vision, get that scene out of your head? You don't necessarily have to complete it right then and there, but you do have to, you know, like you were saying, dislodge it from that memory.
It does help to give it some form and put it on, like, for me, like, I guess hard drive files. And as long as it's there, and as long as it's not like committed to oblivion, like I guess I can come back to this later and stop thinking about it for now. But what happens if I try to do that is then I start thinking about the next step, like that first scene's complete. Well, what would happen next? So I just plague myself further.
Now, have you gotten to the point where you did grind one out? Because I'll be honest with you, I don't believe in writer's block. But when you went ahead and just ground out a story and you got to the end of it and you went for the reread and went, oh, this sucks, I'm going to have to walk away from it.
Oh,
and then just set it aside and never come and not bury it with a shovel, but just not come back to it for a while.
All the time. Yeah, I don't believe in writer's block either, because the best thing you can do for a writer, for anyone listening, is just put something on the page. Because if it's a cloud of options, you have analysis paralysis, you don't write anything, the page stays blank. If you write something terrible, great, anyone can write something terrible. But now that you have it and it's terrible, you can say, this is why it's terrible. Let's push this piece to the right. Let's push this piece to the left. Okay, here's a better shape. And you start to iterate it based on that. Because writer's block, I think, is just analysis paralysis, refusing to actually put anything on the page out of fear of the unknown. And you just got to get through the unknown. You just got to get something on the page. But I absolutely walk away from stuff. I'm like, this is a story that is not panning out the way I thought. Let's just leave it. There's nothing here.
Well, and I think also one of the inspirational things is if you do get a story completed and you don't like it, you set it down, you come back and you reread it. Now that you've got that hard drive space cleared up, normally you can get to the point where you're like, oh, okay, here's where I went wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
Here's where I need to go. I'm glad this is sitting here. I mean, I legit, one of my favorite stories, I'd written like the first 3 pages of it. And I'm like, this really sucks. And I put it away. Didn't touch it. Came back to it like 3-4 years later. And I reread it and I'm like, wait a minute. I know the ending that I wanted to go towards because it was more like a Twilight Zone kind of deal. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, screw this. Let's just keep writing on it. And once again, the organic aspect kicked in, and I legitimately cranked out like, oh God, what was it like? Ended up like 27 pages in like 12 hours.
Oh, nice.
I mean, it was just, yeah, I let them go. I let them off the leash, and I just followed it around and wrote down what the characters were doing. Now, I know there are some budding writers that are in the chat right now, and well, of course we will get to your questions at the top of the hour. So if you want to load any questions in, you got about 15 minutes. If this is your introduction to Matt Dymerski, then please feel free. There are several links down there. Matt's Amazon authors page, I would definitely recommend. Of course, he does have a Twitter and a Facebook as well. And I would certainly recommend that. He is one of the new authors that I like to read, that I enjoy when stuff comes out. And it's, to me, the stuff that I've listened to in audio adaptation is especially thematic. Would you talk a little bit about the creative process? I mean, we talked a little bit about dreaming, but as far as how rich are your visualizations? Is there a time when you have to just kind of make it up that you don't see it, or do you usually get that scene? Like a director who's setting up the shots for his movie.
I have a lot to say on this, but would I actually be able to answer the last question real quick about coming back to a piece later?
Oh, please do.
Yeah, so my Uncle Dan, he is a writer for a tea magazine, or he has his own tea magazine at this point, I believe. He told me something that I really want to impart to other people. It's the greatest wisdom. So, and I don't think he really watches science fiction shows, but he put it in the parlance I understood, and it really helped me. So you have this story you're writing, you get halfway and you're like, oh man, I just really don't know what to do with this. I'm not feeling it. So a person, especially a writer, is like a spaceship with different technologies on it. And right now, you don't have the scanners to scan this pulsar, this story. Like, you can't really interact with this black hole or temporal anomaly or whatever it is. You don't just sit there hoping that something changes. You fly on to other space, and you get new technologies, and you come back, and then you're like, oh wow, now I can open this black hole as like a wormhole to somewhere else, a new adventure. And so that's what I always think of. Like, I might not have the tools to finish this story right now, but that's why I need to go live my life and come back to this later. So you don't feel bad about that. That's a plan. It's a strong plan. And that's the way you work these things out. Never feel bad to table something and come back to it later.
Sure. And honestly, your perspective might have changed as well, because with age comes wisdom.
Yeah.
And you can definitely look at that. And I will be honest with you, my brain just skipped a groove on what the next question was that I had asked.
Oh, the visualization.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So what was the full question again about the visualization of scenes?
Do you actually, when you're writing, do you see it, like a director sees a movie when he's framing shots, or are there times when you just basically kind of have to fill it in because you're not seeing it? You know where you need to go, It's a dark road that you're driving, and you really can't see anything that you're passing in the peripheral, but you know it's there.
So my guiding needle on the record player or whatever it is. So if I am not visualizing it, if I am putting things together with my knowledge of tropes and devices, that's when I know I'm not doing it right. Because like I think I said earlier, I write a lot based on my dreams, and I think because of that, I have this. I know it's absurd after years of conversations with people. Extremely visual imagination, like sensory, like smell, like sights, sounds, everything. And when I know I'm doing a story right for me, when I'm completely envisioning what that character might experience, and some of my readers have even commented like, wow, how would you ever think of that person experiencing that in that moment? It's because I'm trying to literally picture myself in exactly that moment, and those characters are experiencing something that you might not think of as an author sitting in a nice, comfortable chair. Like maybe there's a really irritating itch on their ankle, and like maybe it's not related to the story, but it's real. And you extend that reality forward of like, so this guy stops to itch his ankle, and a bullet flies overhead, saving his life. That kind of thing. Like you go with it. You make everything very like one step to the next, one at a time, and don't use summary over scene. Like summarize things that are boring. Like, oh, we drove into town. You don't need to have the whole drive into town, but the scene, the part where you actually tell step by step what happens, absolutely crucial for that sense of reality, and then skip over the boring stuff. And I think that's what I try to do, is I try to extend that. Like a director directing a movie, I'm just transcribing what I'm seeing in my head to text. And if I'm not doing that, I know I'm not doing it right for me. I get off track,
Truth. I can't agree anymore, because if you're going to be writing, and this is what I found fault with J.R.R. Tolkien. He spent way too much talking about the periphery. When it's like, no, we want to get to the fights. We want to get to the magic. H.G. Wells was kind of like that. He was the king of the run-on sentences. He had some brilliant ideas. It's just, you can pare it down. I didn't know. And honestly, this is one of the things that I actually asked behind the scenes, whether or not these guys had a page count. Because that's always what I'm thinking when I'm hearing somebody being over descriptive, is that they've got a publisher or a publicist that's saying, no, it has to be, it has to be 50,000 words.
They're filling out the story like a school essay. Got to be 2 pages. Got to fill up this last page.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that from time to time I get people who are just like, I really like your writing, and how do you do this and how do you do that? And it's like, you know what, you can have the greatest story in the world, but if you try to bog it down, if you're putting so much jewelry on it, like Mr. T, it's going to become bogged down and ineffective.
I used to think that way until I realized that there is a secret unlabeled genre that like Amazon's not aware of, readers aren't aware of. We don't have a word for it. But I actually grew up reading some of these. Like I love fantasy, I love science fiction, and there were fantasy books and science fiction books where things happen. And then there's fantasy books I still absolutely love, like Robert Silverberg's Magivore series. That as I was reading it, I realized he's spending an inordinate amount of time on like the wines, the foods, the carnivals, like the clothes people are wearing. And when I saw that George R.R. Martin did the same thing, I realized this is a secret genre of escapist fantasy where the events in motion can captivate like you and me. But I think a lot of readers are actually reading to experience the luxuries and the fineries and the gray wine. What is gray wine? I have no idea. What's like this fancy type of pork and all these like rich, luxurious clothes? They're thinking about that and visualizing themselves in a life they don't have. And then the other events, they kind of make it more real. But I think that's actually a secret genre of fantasy books. It's all about the luxury and the escapist fantasy, and the events of the story themselves are actually secondary. And I kind of think that's what a Game of Thrones is about when I actually read it. Like the TV show puts all that stuff into visual form, and we're like, wow, like look how beautiful that place is. Look at all that cool food.
You really need to come up with a name for that and trademark it.
Yeah, that would absolutely be something important.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that kind of bugs me, and I want to see if you feel the same way about this, is if you feel like you're writing a story and it's heading into a trope, do you try to just plow through the trope because you feel it's necessary to the story, or will you pull out all stops to swerve as far away from that trope as possible?
I'm really lucky to be alive in the time I am with the reader base that I have, because my characters are allowed to be a little bit self-aware. So when I absolutely must face a trope, well, the characters themselves have read all the same stories and seen all the same movies we have, so they're able to handle it with less than annoying grace. Like they're like, "Oh, I've seen this before in a movie," or this seems really cliche. Or, little things like that help you. Like, all right, we handled it. We hit the trope. Let's move on. I'm really lucky to have that.
And I like it because there's some stories, and I apologize for not having names in front of me, where it seems like you're steering directly into the trope, and then in your head, this is what I imagine. You're like, ah ha ha ha, not gonna go there.
Mm-hmm.
Like you put a decent, the trope's still there, but you put a swerve on it.
Absolutely, you got to subvert the trope sometimes, and it's fun to play with reader expectations because it's really a game between you and the reader of like, here's this labyrinth and we're going to navigate it this way. Well, or are we?
Yeah, and I found there's a lot of, and I don't know if this is because of the business side of it, where people get to where writers get trapped in it, like Tom Clancy having to continually write these SEAL Team 6 type things, or how John Sanford has to make kind of his mysteries line up. Do you think that it's a good or a bad thing if a reader comes in expecting like, oh, okay, I've read his first 3 books, it's going to be the same thing for the 4th book? Is that something that you consciously have in your head when it's not necessarily a continuance of a story? It's just, this is what they've come to expect from your writing. Do you also take a little bit of umbrage and try to write outside the lines that you're normally comfortable with?
Here's a 2-part answer, and one of these is really, really crucial for any aspiring authors. The only thing in all of creativity that you can do wrong is change genres on your audience mid-sell. So for someone like Tom Clancy, he must write SEAL Team 6 stories because that's what Tom Clancy does. So if a reader came to book 8 and it started as a SEAL Team 6 story and turned into a romance, they'd be furious. Way more furious than if it was just a bad SEAL Team 6 book. So absolutely got to stick to your genre. And knowing that, as an author, I have purposely messed with my own format almost every single story. Even chapter by chapter or series by series, I'll change perspective on the voice, going from third person to first person. I'll completely change the format, the length, the topic of what's happening, because I don't want readers to get mistaken and think that the Matt Dymerski brand means this specific kind of story, so that I'm not stuck in that. And also I really enjoy the challenge. So someone will say to me, "Why don't you write a story with a character who doesn't speak any language at all?" I'm like, well, how could I possibly? All right, I'll try that. I'll do that challenge. And so that's that 2-part answer of never switch genres on your reader, and for me personally, trying to avoid becoming a certain type of genre on purpose to avoid that.
Well, and I've got a great example of that. You've read Piers Anthony.
Absolutely.
And his Xanth stuff is mind blowing, incredibly thick, incredibly rich.
I grew up reading that, actually. I love those series.
But when he did the series about the cosmic dentist. What was it? Prosta Plus? He drew a lot of fire from his fans because he flipped automatically and went to total science fiction from the rich layering of fantasy genre that he'd been running in the Xanth books.
Yeah. Actually, I think I remember some of that controversy.
Yeah, and honestly, Piers Anthony is a very good writer. I thought the intergalactic dentist thing was hilarious.
He's an amazing writer. Like, I absolutely loved everything I wrote from him. But you're absolutely right. So I remember that there was just like 100 Xanth books. There was always a new one coming out. I absolutely see how that could happen, where people reading the Xanth book go to one of his new series and they're like, "What is this? This isn't Xanth."
Oh yeah, I mean, I think you can tell that from the Blue Adept series when he tried to do something new.
Oh yeah. Oh man, you're bringing up so many memories. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a complete fan of the Blue Adept series. I thought that was going to be his bridge, because he was mixing fantasy, which is what he's known for, with a little bit of science fiction into the genre, so he could springboard out. And I know there are authors that get basically, do I say pigeonholed? Yeah, I'll say pigeonholed, like Stephen King. And
yeah,
you can see him trying to stretch and flex. Like with Misery, yeah, sure, it's kind of a horror story, but he wanted to flex out and show that he could actually write a romance novel.
Yeah. Actually, I've been watching Stephen King, another author and I guess movie maker as well, my whole life, eagerly hoping that he can, I don't know, like break into something new if he wants to. But like, there's a very, very specific Stephen King style that I think the world has come to expect. And I remember that he tried to make one with the trucks that come alive because of a meteor, Maximum Overdrive.
Yes.
And there was like very negative reception, and so he didn't try to handle movies himself anymore. I really felt bad for that, because I loved that movie. Like, he was trying to do something a little bit different from his normal stuff, and I really wanted to succeed.
Well, but now I'm not talking bad about him, because he admitted this, that he was coked up through most of it. So I mean, maybe now after the car accident, maybe he might be able to settle down. I heard that on Kingdom Hospital, he was there a lot during the filming. And
I mean, he can basically do whatever he wants now, I imagine. Although J.K. Rowling sort of got flack for writing books that weren't Harry Potter, and I was like, "Wow, really? You guys are going to turn on J.K. Rowling because she's trying to change genre?"
Well, I will say there are people whose writing styles that I respect, and unfortunately, she is not one of them. I mean, okay, she sold millions and millions of books, but once again, like 50 Shades of Grey, that doesn't necessarily mean you're a good author. And do you ever find yourself struggling with, okay, what I'm going to make something that's going to be commercial?
Well, there's a whole lot of stuff to say about that, but I will say all of us authors are definitely in this bind together. For example, like Stephanie Meyer, who wrote the Twilight books. Oh man, Twilight. Yeah, Twilight is Twilight. But then she tried to branch out and write a science fiction novel, and everyone got like super mad about it. And I'm like, maybe I'm not the biggest fan of Twilight, but oh, come on, guys. She's trying to write what she wants to write here. And I just see this like, I guess pigeonholing is the right word. It's a tough thing to avoid, but there is a practical solution, and I wanted to tell any aspiring authors here. It's all in the marketing, and nowadays pen names. So if you really want to use the same pen name, like, or your real name, because I write under my real name, you got to slam your books, like cover, title, description, everything on Amazon, everywhere you put it with. So let's say you're normally a fantasy author. Well, this is science fiction. You have to have a spaceship on the cover. You have to have, like, the title is spacey, the description spacey. You have to put it on your website in a different section. Say, like, here's the fantasy section of my work. Here's the science fiction section. So as long as the readers know that what they're about to buy is not their usual fare, maybe your sales will be lower, but you won't piss anybody off because they just have to know what they're getting into. And that's why the covers of books are so like cliche and blatant. Like, you just put a spaceship on it. It's science fiction. Is there a spaceship in the story? No, doesn't matter. The spaceship's there to tell you it's science fiction. And so that's one thing you got to do. And the other thing, I know a bunch of moderate level authors use pen names. So all their science fiction goes under one pen name and all their fantasy goes under one pen name. And that's another way you can dodge that pigeonholing problem. Yeah, you just have to let your audience know what they're in for.
Well, yeah, and I'll be talking to C.K. Walker next month about that too, because, you know, when she writes on the show The Haunting of Hill House, she uses her real name, but anything that's gone under pen, that's out and around the interwebs is under C.K. Walker. So I can see that being helpful.
Yeah.
And since we're at the top of the hour, time flies. I'll be honest with you, I don't even think we've even scratched the surface of how important that writing is. If you'd like to go ahead and start loading up your questions into the chat, we will fire them out as soon as they come up. As a matter of fact, somebody early on, Michelle Jones, asks, do you have any tips for people who struggle with writing an ending? Now, we kind of talked about that a bit, but if you want to deep dive on that.
I would love to deep dive on this. So endings are the absolute hardest thing to do in all of creativity, I believe, because like paintings just exist, you know, like, but stories, they're taking you on a journey. And if you, so I'll say this from a perspective, if you have not started your story with an end in mind, like the strategy I talked about earlier, think of the final moment first. So you haven't done that. You started at the beginning, you wrote 70 or 90% of your story, and now you have to think of an ending. Well, this is a tough situation. There's a couple things that you can do. And at first I'll comment on, specifically for horror, endings are incredibly divisive and difficult because as a reader reads a horror story, they are imagining their perfect freaking monster or villain or ending. Like, it is the best story they've ever read. Halfway through, they're like, this is pure gold. And then, but like, so that's the difference between horror and terror. The anticipation of the reveal is incredible. It's specific to that person. The actual reveal can never be specific to a million different people. So once you actually reach the ending, this is the first piece of advice. Be at peace with the fact that at least 50% of your readers are going to hate your ending. Because yeah, they imagined their perfect ending for them. And it could have been anything. Like, it could have been like spaceships jump down and pick up your guy, like in the Life of Brian movie. Could have been like a very calm, quiet, emotional ending. But there's no way that you can make a specific ending for a million different people because you've only got one ending. So just be okay with it being bad. That's the first piece of advice. Second piece of advice, honestly, a lot of times I rely on other people. I let them read a story and I say, once they're done with it, I say, what did you think was going to happen next? And they'll say, oh, well, obviously he does. I'm like, oh, that's not what oh, okay. And you think about that and you've got some new data because, like that spaceship analogy earlier where you only have certain technologies interact with certain strange objects in space, other people have different technologies on their spaceships. So sometimes you borrow from them and you're like, well, I would never have thought of it that way. And you work it together, you put it in, and all of a sudden it works. Definitely like get that energy juice from other people. Energy juice? I don't know.
Well, and the only part that I'd put on it is when you go to an ending, the first question that comes to mind is there finality, or do these characters want to continue on?
Oh, that is a good question. To say, like, there's several different types of finality, but if it's a true ending, you absolutely need to find some note of finality. It's very rare that I think a story does this, but when a story doesn't actually give you finality, it feels like, oh, it just ended. That's not the end. And as long as you avoid that feeling, even if the ending is bad, I think most readers and audiences have a certain amount of allowance for that because they intrinsically, subconsciously know, like, they were imagining this incredible story, this perfect ending for them, and they get to the end, and it's not quite that. But, like, it's okay, you know. They're not going to be mad because endings rarely give you exactly what you want. It's very rare that that happens, but if someone says that they look over your story and say, "Oh, it's not the ending," like, what, you know, it doesn't feel like an ending. That's the one thing you got to rewrite, figure something out here, give that note of finality.
Yeah, I had a throwaway writing piece. That was it was just a story about an assassin who found out that he was hunting demons, and it was just writing to be writing, right? And I got to the end of it, and I was like, you know what? I like this character, and it ended up turning into a book. It's just, yeah. I think it's really important, and I know we touched base on this, to be as organic as possible with your characters, because I know in my head, usually when I set up a character, it's got an aspect of somebody that I know from in real life. Because I don't just want to hear my voice talking to me in my head. So I'll put somebody else's voice in it, and you know, it could be somebody that I know, or it could be somebody that, you know, I've seen on the silver screen or heard on radio, and I hope that really helps to put, you know, the muscle and the flesh on the bones.
Yeah.
But now is the now. I didn't ask this because, I mean, we got so deep into the writing philosophy. But what was the first book that you ever read that really blew you away?
First book I ever read. The one that first comes to mind, I don't know if that would be my answer if I had more time to think, but I mentioned it earlier. Robert Silverberg wrote this Madripoor series, and it's about this gigantic planet, like many times the size of Earth, but with low, like, normal gravity for people on it. And it was set in the future, so spacecraft had delivered people and alien races there, but space travel was very rare. So it was just basically this fantasy world with a science fiction veneer on it, full of cool, crazy stuff. I think I mentioned, like, the wines and the foods and everything, and the main character was a deposed king. So of course, being a deposed king, there's the obvious story of, like, let's travel back to the center of the world, you know, the castle, and get that kingship back. And I remember reading that, and it was probably like the first real thick book I read, and I was at, like, my grandma's house on family reunion, and instead of hanging out with my family, I was reading this book upstairs. I just couldn't put it down. And there is other styles of life out there. Like, I had only known my type of life, and then here's this type of life. People, you know, being jugglers, or people being innkeepers, or people being merchants traveling across land. There are other styles of living, and I think ever since then I've tried to look at people, like, people watch, and think, how do you live your life? Like, you're walking by me in this 30 seconds, but what's before that? What's after that? And I think a lot of people don't really think about that. There are whole, complete lives as full as yours all around you all the time. And I really think that's really just what writing is giving you a window into someone else's life. You know, watching that and being like, wow, like, glad I'm not there, or, like, wish I could be there. That kind of feeling.
Now, what would be the biggest rabbit hole that you've fallen down into when writing a story, where you're like, oh, I'll just look up a little bit of research to be semi-accurate, and then you just basically drop straight down, and the only thing you could see is daylight, but not a way to climb up?
Oh, so the science fiction series I've been writing has a multiverse background where, like, there's an infinite number of different worlds, different Earths you can go to. And when I actually had to start looking up the physics of this kind of thing, actual physics is this incredibly complex, unsolved topic that has a lot of implications for the meaning of life, how we live our lives, like, you know, maybe what the afterlife might be. There's no conclusive answers, but you go on Wikipedia and you just start reading about these things like string theory or higher dimensional physics and the structure of the universe. The thing that struck me most when I was down this rabbit hole was the fact that like our galaxy, or maybe even our like cluster of galaxies, is pretty much the farthest away from the rest of the universe that anything can be, because the universe actually has sort of like pillar structure, and we're between pillars. We're this giant black space far from any of these pillars. And I don't know if like that says anything conclusive, but sometimes that makes me feel like we're really, really alone here, or maybe we're really, really safe here from some other problem going on in the universe. You know, inspiration just left and right from what would we be safe from, or you know, like what it would be like to be lonely forever if the entire universe is filled with alien races that all know each other, but we're not part of that because we're too far away. I don't know. It's lots to think about.
Yeah, that is incredibly deep. So and I've had people ask me the question of, you know, and Hemingway said that the greatest stories are the stories that come from living them. And I'll ask because I think this is important, because I think Hemingway was misconstrued that you had to live this weird life that he led in order to have decent stories. But can you take something from your personal life that is subtle, that's not grandiose, and be able to incorporate it into a story to essentially add more flesh to the skeleton?
I do think that living experience contributes some real solidness to a story in the way that people would not normally think about something. But I think you're right that he was misconstrued, because it doesn't necessarily have to be extraordinary. For one example that you immediately thought of when you said this, maybe 10 years ago, I was living with a girlfriend at the time, and things weren't great between us, but the coffee maker was broken. And I have to have my coffee. So every morning I'd make coffee, and the way that it was broken is that it would spill coffee over the edge just before it was finished. And you don't sit and watch a pot of coffee.
Yeah.
So every morning this coffee would boil over, slide down the cabinets, and I'd come back and I'd clean it up. But after some unknown time, the cabinets just below this coffee maker were peeling. And we were both standing there looking at it. We're like, the coffee's peeling off the stuff, you know, the cabinets like sealant. And that's when we both suddenly were able to admit this relationship isn't working, because nobody dealt with the broken coffee maker for so long that it stripped, you know, the sealants off the cabinets below it. And that's just such a ridiculously mundane thing that leads to like greater honesty and hints at such greater pains. I think that's what he meant, is like the things that you experience, you know, in such depth that you can convey something real with them. And you don't have to live a crazy life or a weird life, because that's just a coffee maker in somebody's house, you know? It's nothing important.
I can agree. I mean, because even if you're writing a fantasy or a horror story, the best way to ground it is with elements of reality. Or else you're basically kind of making people want to disassociate from the actual story and not buy into it.
Absolutely.
Now I've run into this before, so let me ask: what was the strangest inspiration for a story? Something where you encountered something and it was bizarre, but it essentially led you down a path to go write a story.
Okay, so I was actually going for runs in this neighborhood. I was like running through between the houses and stuff, and I actually got lost in a way that should not have been possible. And to this day, I'm like, I think back, sometimes I look at the Google Maps of the area and it just doesn't make any sense. I'm like running between all these houses, and I felt a little bit scared because I'm like I could, I suppose, knock on some of these doors if I had to, if I really had to, but I just kept going and going and going. And sometimes I'd pick a direction and go for like half a mile, and I'd be like, I'm still lost. How can I get out from between like these houses and these alleyways and these garages? And I have no idea how I actually got out of there. Maybe I'm still there actually. No, so that inspired actually an entire series of stories called The Back Paths about running between houses and finding yourself in a maze-like situation that turned out to the main characters to be an illusionary alternate reality controlled by a giant eyeball monster who could beam illusions directly into your brain. So you weren't really in a maze. You were actually in this labyrinthine alternate reality controlled by this horrific monster. And they I was just like, where did this nonsense come from? And the monster would actually do things like turn gravity upside down, so the main characters were like holding onto trees and screaming until they realized, like, wait, this isn't real. Like, what am I doing? And I don't know. That was just like the weirdest sequence of events from personal life to story I can think of.
And I know I might get this wrong, so please feel free to forgive me. But isn't the one you wrote, I have a very strange curse, about the duplicating man?
Yes.
Okay. I'm now that seems to me, and I may just be reading into it, but that seems to be real life frustration fleshing itself out.
Ooh, there's a lot of that in my work. Which type of frustration do you mean specifically?
Basically not being able to do the things that he wanted to do.
Hmm.
There had to be more of him to complete all the things that he wanted to do in a day.
Yeah. So there's a secret that my horror is actually also science fiction, and it's very subtle, but it's the framing of the work, because I'm trying to get people to think about their lives. And right now, the world is this constricting vice that is crushing us little by little, day by day, and has a lot to do with economics, has a lot to do with politics and that kind of thing. But just the pressure of daily life is growing. And I remember being younger. I remember life being a tiny bit easier, and I'm finding it strange that, wow, it's 2019. Why is life harder than last year? And that's definitely where that feeling of like I need to duplicate myself to get ahead comes from. Of like rent's a little bit higher, like food's a little bit more expensive, which is just the opposite of how anything should work. But that frustration is definitely there in that story.
Yeah, I mean, I could feel it. It's definitely palpable. I know you have segments to where what you're writing becomes visceral. Do you ever have a tendency to get lost? I mean, I know with an organic way of writing, it's kind of like you're sitting in the passenger seat giving directions to your imagination. But do you ever find yourself lost in a story?
Absolutely. And that feeling I think I described earlier of when I find myself thinking logistically, oh, what should the character do? And it doesn't really feel like anything, that's when I know I'm off the rails. I got to get back to what would the character do and envision it and feel it. And if I'm not able to do that, I'm lost. Let's just, either get rid of this story, or sometimes I pick a random amount of paragraphs and just delete them. Literally gone forever. And I almost never delete anything ever. I'll save all the texts in some other file. But if you really have to, just cut off the end and start again. Like delete the last 7 paragraphs. And maybe you delete something important or crucial, but you got to do what you got to do.
Do you ever get lost in the aspect of, I don't know where this is going, but I'm just going to keep writing it?
Yeah. Sometimes if you don't know where it's going, but it's still good, just keep going until you see something like a light in the distance of, oh, that could be the point of all of this.
So what do you think for a budding writer? What do you think the most I won't say egregious, but the biggest flaw that happens when they attempt to write.
Ooh, I think we've touched a little bit on a lot of the things that first-time writers, the stumbling blocks they hit, like that whole like, as you know, since you've been my brother for 32 years, that kind of thing. Like that's, but I honestly think that choice of where to start the narrative is the biggest problem, because the first-time writer has this world in mind and they want to introduce you to the world, but the best stories don't start with world creation myth or introducing how this city works. And because a lot of the writers I talk to, because actually for a long time I actually had a business helping publish these authors and get them online and working, they would say, okay, so well, in my world, magic is real, and the government uses magic. I'm like, whoa, okay, that is not where you start, because they're trying to start with the world. What you start with is, I have a character and she's unhappy. There you go. That's the hook to a story. Now, why is she unhappy? And it's a very simple difference, but it changes everything about how a story is perceived, because readers don't bond with a world, and worlds are a dime a dozen. Every book has a world with magic in it, or spaceships or whatever. No one actually bonds with any of that. That's just the setting for what is a person feeling. And your first line or your first paragraph needs to say, the old man had lived a long life and he was about to die, but he was happy. And readers like, oh, well, why is he happy? No, let's get into it. So that's what I usually advise. Don't start with all that world building. Start with the character feeling something.
I always have a tendency to think back to Clive Barker's Weave World. And like the opening, the opening paragraph, I think is like nothing ever begins. There's no first moment. There's no spoken or single word where a story comes from. So with that in mind, this is where we start.
Yeah.
It seems incredibly lazy, but I don't know. I find a certain genius in it. That it's just like, hey, let's not get bogged down. Let's just jump right into the story.
Absolutely. That's absolutely yes. Because the most lived-in worlds have stuff already happening before you start. And I absolutely love as a reader when I notice a detail, like there was a notch on the wall. And later you encounter a character who's like, has anger issues. And you're like, wait, did he cause that notch in the wall before the story even started? That's how you feel a world's real.
Yeah, and I think literature, as opposed to movies and television shows, they have to be more blatant, or they feel that they have to be more blatant. Whereas, when you dip into the first chapter of a book, if they said, the lead character was a tall blonde with blue eyes, that's kind of pretty much where they leave it at. You can fill in the other facial features. You can see by, or you can presuppose by how this person walks or talks, how they actually physically look. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think writing is a collaborative thing between the writer and the reader. To where,
yep, absolutely.
I keep going back to the old saying, you give them enough rope to hang themselves, but they might actually take that rope and make a nice macrame chair out of it.
Absolutely. In fact, this is actually a topic really specific to me in terms of like faces and appearances of characters, because some of my readers have noticed I almost never describe my characters at all, because I have found that the way that I perceive characters and the way I want my readers to perceive the characters actually really comes from like the shape and pronunciation of the name of the character, like how you pronounce it in your head, maybe connotations you have from society, but also like the shape of the letters. So like I choose my names very carefully, because it's very blatant with characters. If your name is like all X's and Z's, like Zitka Waddle or something like that, you envision a person who's very exotic and different from you. You have no prior idea who this person is. But if your character is named Mandy, you're immediately picturing, I don't know, like a American female in college wearing a North Face jacket, I don't know, something like that. And then you can sculpt that with their character actions. So like if I say this character Mandy, and this is her, and she does something immediately very smart. You're like, oh, okay, so she's not a college girl. She's not like a sorority girl at all. And I'm like, okay, she's doing something with science. Oh, this is a scientist, Mandy. Okay. Like, I never actually, like, because the physical description I immediately forget. So like particular to me, I'll try to like shape it with the very carefully chosen name and their introducing actions.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I've done some descriptions where it's like not describing them in detail. Just saying stuff like he was not a very attractive man, but he had a great personality.
Yeah, I like that a lot. One of the words I used to great effect was a single mention of a character who has been in like a million words of stories, by the way. I called his hair greasy. And from that, all the readers immediately understood that he was like a nerdy, scrawny type. I never said anything else about him, but they got that, like, because he had mentioned something about video games and his hair was greasy. I say that as a video game player myself. Like, I literally work for a computer game company, so no offense intended to nerds, but they got it. They understood.
Yeah, I think honestly that writers and books treat their audience more intelligently than movies and TV.
I think they have to. There's been a definite evolution of movies, and actually, I just watched a horror movie from 1980 called The Beyond by like an Italian director.
Oh yeah,
and I love that movie, even though it was like very surreal and dreamlike, because that movie could not have been made today. Modern audiences, probably at the behest of executives and big corporations, they have this like, here is your main character. This is going to be the survivor that you should bond with, and this is the killer, and he kills because he has a spider complex. He thinks he's a spider, and I'm watching this like, come on, man. Whereas this like movie from 1981 or whatever, it told us nothing. It was like, hey, this house is haunted, but then everyone just like dies, and then the characters go to hell, like actual hell. And like, I have no idea what just happened, but that was interesting. Couldn't be made today.
Was that Fulci?
Yes.
Okay. Damn that Fulci. He is amazing. Every single movie that he's ever made is kind of like an acid trip.
Yeah, actually, that's exactly what it was. It's very surreal and dreamlike, and I had to look it up on Wikipedia to find out about the style of Italian horror at the time. But what that movie did do is stimulate a conversation between myself and my partner about what was this movie about. And to me, actually, like thinking of what themes might have been implied here was way more engaging than a modern horror movie where a slasher just kills random teenagers. I just think like, so someone might say that movie was bad compared to modern movies, but I talked more about it and thought more about it than any movie I've seen recently.
Well, just like, have you watched the remake of Suspiria?
I have not.
I have to talk to you about that later once you watch that one to get your opinion of the original and what they actually made. I think it's interesting. I do want to. Sorry guys, I'm getting behind in the chat. Addie asks, speaking of worlds, what's your thought on Frank Herbert as an author?
Oh, Frank Herbert. So I grew up in a house, thanks to my dad, that had like 5 massive shelves full of classic science fiction books. Frank Herbert was one of them, of the authors on there. And so I got to like read Dune. I got to see the movie Dune. And then like many years later, the remake of Dune, stuff like that. And I love his ideas and the juxtaposition of crazy things going on in Frank Herbert's universes. And I'm not sure I'm qualified to comment beyond that, but it's very engaging and lasts in your mind. Not a lot of authors have the courage to just say, okay, my world is set 10,000 years in the future and everything is completely different. There's nothing that you can possibly relate to other than the fact that human beings still exist and still, have emotions and families and such. And it's wild.
I will say that the first thick book that I ever read was Frank Herbert's Dune, and I was amazed by the kind of in opposition to what Tolkien did. He didn't really spend a lot of time with descriptors, but he did spend a lot of time with the characters, and the characters themselves eventually fleshed out what the world was. I mean, it seemed to come organically.
I like his focus on like a family and a particular couple of characters because the world was so radical that if he had tried to explain the whole world and everything, it would have just gotten bogged down. And I also loved that he guessed, or rather accurately predicted, that artificial intelligence would be a problem because the backstory of his universe, for people that might not be aware, there was like artificial intelligences called like Titans or something became so powerful that they basically ran everything for humanity and made humanity slaves. And there was a massive uprising to destroy all artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence was outlawed by the time of the story, which is an incredibly cool story element, as like the real reason the author chose this is so that human beings could still matter. But I still like that idea of like, yeah, one day we're going to have to deal with this very soon. Like artificial intelligence is going to be something in our lifetime that we're going to have to take a stand on.
Yeah, and I can say that, when comparing to his contemporaries, I think Isaac Asimov kind of bogged down in what he was trying to do with explaining AI, where I think Frank Herbert did it more elegantly. And,
yeah, I can agree with that.
And he did it without those scary sideburns. But yeah, and if I'm correct on this, I thought that, and somebody can back me up on this, I thought that Dune came out before iRobot came out, before he started delving into it. But I'm probably wrong. I think one predates the other by like 20 or like 15 years.
Oh, really?
And it could be Asimov who won that race, because they call him the father of science fiction robotics.
I think iRobot was like early 50s, because the books that I read were all from like the 50s to 70s eras, I think.
Now, as far as a composition to a story, and basically breaking it down as a writer, which writer do you think taught you the most about writing subtextually?
This might be a controversial answer, but I would say almost none of them, because I sort of purposely avoid reading in my genre now because I grew up reading all these books and I felt that I got the sense of what they were about. But now I don't want to compromise my voice, because I know that if I read like a really good author, I'm going to start to write like him for a little bit. Oh. And I've had that before where like I read a bunch of H.P. Lovecraft stories and then my prose turned all purple and elegant, and I wrote like a bunch of stories that were like well received, but they were dramatically different from my normal style, and they were very long, very wordy, very descriptive, and I'm like, whoa, what happened? So I tried not to read other fantastic authors unless I'm like on a vacation, isolated from my personal process.
Yeah, because I was going to say, yeah, because Lovecraft made me overly wordy. Like one of the first stories that ever got picked up that I did was kind of an homage to Lovecraft, and I'm like, but I'm not that writer.
Yeah, it's a powerful style.
Yeah, he's the first and only writer, because I started reading him in my early teens. He's the only writer where I had to have a thesaurus sitting next to me, because it's like, wait a minute, what's this word? Okay, let's flip over. Oh, okay, that's what it means. You know,
Yeah.
like the one that really stumbled me was Icker. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
I'm like, what the hell is Icker? I'm 13 years old, and I'm like, what the hell is Icker? But yeah, I mean, uh, you get a bug in your ear as a writer. I can completely agree. The only thing that I read nowadays is nonfiction, because it's usually flat and dry, and there's nothing fantastical except for the facts, and you can only write the facts in a certain way. But yeah, people are like, "Hey, have you read the latest blah 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 or this or that?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't, and I sincerely can't."
Yeah. I think the safest time to read powerful authors is between works, because it's okay if they influence a future work. But if I read, I don't know, like H.P. Lovecraft in the middle of a story, readers are going to be like, what just happened? Like everything changed. Oh, and also I would recommend to budding authors to not do what I do, but like budding authors should absolutely read like 30 examples of what they're trying to write, and just like really dive into that genre, and then like their brain will be charged up with the right energy to do it. Like exactly what happened to me with Psychosis. Like just don't be afraid to read all of the greats, because if your first couple of works emulate a great author, good for you. You know what? You'll find your voice later, right?
Yeah, because I found that when I was writing horror, I would pull like Lovecraft and Ludlum and Shelley, and even to some extent Howard, and Burroughs, just to figure out what the motion is, kind of kind of like a watchmaker, open the back of it and see how the gears go.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I don't know. Is there any story that you wrote that you kind of regret because you see that influence, where you're thinking, yeah, that's really not me?
I am proud of all of my children being stories. But I will say, so the secret of H.P. Lovecraft is that his prose, people always talk about the cosmic entities and the eldritch abominations and stuff, but I think the secret of that is that he can make the most boring things scary. He can make a hallway scary, because I'm thinking of one in particular where, like, so a character is in the desert, he finds a ancient ruin, a staircase in the desert. He goes down that staircase and he's going down this hallway, and on the hallway are pictures, like ancient depictions of something, and you just know he's going to encounter it at the end of this hallway. But H.P. Lovecraft made a hallway scary, and I think about that sometimes. Like, he can do that with anything, just with the way that it's written. And when I attempt to do that, I don't think I get away with it. And so there's some stories where I try to make a hallway scary, and it's not that scary. Like, I should just stick to my style.
Well, and one of the ones that pops up to mind for me for H.P. Lovecraft is not his cosmic fantastical writings, but do you remember the story Rats in the Walls?
Yep, classic.
I mean, that thing was like truly basically unknown horror, kind of frightening, and not really bent on the sci-fi. It's just fear of the unknown. What the hell's going on? Do you ever find yourself when you're writing a story overwhelmed by a concept that you would like to portray, but you just can't wrap your mind around it?
Absolutely. In fact, I made a note earlier in this podcast for myself to investigate this idea further, but it's a thing I run into a lot, where like the thing that's scary can't really be drawn well with the brush strokes of writing, either with like my current talents or voice. And so like there's this thing, like I know it's scary. And for example, one of the things I've been trying to make scary since I was literally 10 years old is the concept of invisible beings that are watching us all day, every day, and they're not actively harmful. Like they'll be standing in the spaces that we never go to, and that's where the idea came from. The spaces that we're nearby but never go to, like little grassy islands in a giant parking lot, or like the one corner of the outside of a building where nobody ever actually steps, because the world is very well traveled now, but there are little spaces inside it that no one ever actually goes. Like, what if invisible beings were standing there watching us? And I have tried to make this damn concept scary somehow for like 20 years. And I just don't think that that type of feeling can adequately be expressed with my current like talent set and voice, because it's bigger than individual words, and I'm writing around it, and I can't get to the heart of why that's freaky. Because imagine you're standing on a parking lot, I don't know, smoking a cigarette or something, and you suddenly are aware that you're not alone because somebody is standing like 5 feet away watching you, but you can't see them. That feels scary. But like, how do you put that into a story?
It's incredibly difficult, because the reader is relying on you to be the gateway drug.
Yeah.
And if you fail in your mind, somebody might be able to understand it, but most of the time it's they need you to be the gatekeeper. They need you to be able to be the pathfinder. And if you can convince them in your writing that this is true and legit, then you can proceed on. But yeah, I think a lot of people just say, oh well, that person's creative, or that person just has an imagination, and there's just so much more to it than. Go ahead.
Actually, you're absolutely right. I actually have had this conversation before with a friend of mine, the concept of genius. People like to say, oh, Albert Einstein was just a genius. No, Albert Einstein worked really hard, and he actually was able in his mind to visualize what he was working with. And that's what I tell authors too. Like, if you feel it, your reader will feel it. Like if you're writing your story and you're sitting there at your computer freaking blubbering and crying because of a sad scene, your reader's gonna feel that. Like, but if you're sitting at your computer and you're like smiling and sipping a latte and you're writing a sad scene, it's really unlikely that they're going to feel sad, I think. So like hard work and feeling it yourself and being there in the moment, I think is the true talent. And just saying someone's a genius or someone's just creative, that's just a way of sort of like ascribing it to magic or a quality you can never have. But I don't think there's any human being that can't work towards something and achieve it. Like if a person who is 40 years old right now decided, I want to learn how to write, he can do that. Why would he not be able to do that? So it's just a way of giving up, is to just say someone's creative or a genius. Now you could do that if you wanted to,
Oh, certainly. And it's, you don't have to be the smartest person in the world. You just have to be able to translate what your vision is. I mean, there are people out there in the corporate world who figured out, what type of widget that they wanted to make and how they wanted to make it, and they're a success by it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they can sit around and talk Mensa to everybody. They just figured out what they like to do and the energy that they needed to put behind it to make it beneficial for them.
Yeah, knowledge is very specific, and I actually take issue with the very common American television concept of just like Dr. House. He's just a genius. Well, I mean, what? What does that mean? Like, knowledge is very specific.
Well, he did go to school, so
That's true. Yeah,
wisdom does factor in, and knowledge does too.
Better example. Yeah, Dr. House is actually specifically a doctor. Better example, all the science fiction shows where like they take a scientist, just a scientist, and the scientist is like, I work with quantum physics, and they're like, but can you fix this machine? And he's like, okay, and he actually does it. I'm like, that's not how that works at all.
One of those, sure, you know how molecules agitate, but can you fix a flat tire?
Yeah, exactly.
How important is it when you're writing a character that that the readers are able to find some synergy with?
I think it's crucial, like absolutely 100% crucial, but not necessarily in the way that people expect. Like I've heard a lot of conversations about this where the other person says, well, like, so this giant demon the size of a galaxy, well, I'm gonna have him get trapped in a human body so that viewers can relate to him or readers can relate to him. And I'm like, well, I mean, he doesn't literally have to be the same demographic as your reader and human. He just has to have emotions like your reader does. Like, couldn't a galactic-sized entity be lonely, or could it be sad, or could it be in love? Like readers relate to that feeling. You don't have to actually make them like a normal human being doing normal human being stuff. And I've been watching this TV show Lucifer, which I absolutely love. I'm not knocking it, but they have the actual literal devil like come to Los Angeles and solve crimes on a weekly basis. And I'm just like, okay, you took the actual biblical concept of the devil and put him in a serial crime procedural. Like, it's still a lot of fun to watch, but I think like that doesn't necessarily have to be how you do it.
And you see this trope happening a lot, especially in movies and television shows, where they bring in what I like to call the salt of the earth character, the everyday man.
Mm-hmm.
So the people who are watching can get a sense of what's going on if it is a fantastical type of world. I mean, is that something that when you write you think about, or like you were saying, you just take more of the humanistic approach and hopefully they sync up that way?
Well, I've got a dual answer on this because I was actually yesterday just talking to an author about this. I think it's perfectly acceptable to have a new character to ask questions and to be the audience's viewpoint if you handle it right. That being said, my personal style is to just go, and you can figure it out if you want to on the way, because like that's my personal style, but that's not everybody's style. And there are readers who want that very blatant, I'm a new character, how does all this work, questions. And that's definitely okay. It's not a bad thing, I think.
Yeah, I'm thinking. Yeah, it just depends. I think a lot on the genre as well as far as avoiding those landmines that are tropes, to where you can figure out how best to connect with your viewers, with your readership.
Oh, I guess there is something I could say. I wouldn't call tropes landmines. Tropes are just tools. Like, we link together a series of tropes. And one of the funny problems about writing and creativity in general is that all ideas have basically already been done. So literally every device is a trope, either used straight or subverted. And I think what people are afraid of is not the trope itself, but the cliche, where the trope is used in a way that it becomes the point. The trope can never be the point, because that's like, that's been done a long time ago. Like, that's cliche. The trope just gets you to the point. As long as you stick to that rule, I think it's okay.
And I cannot disagree. I think I think there's a lot of very creative writing out there that can maneuver around the trope, because they always talk about how there are only 7 types of stories that can ever be written. But it's like the facet of a diamond. Sure, it's a diamond. It's the same as every other diamond, but it has so many different facets that it depends where you look at it as to where the color shines. And that's why people continuously crave content or different authors. Like, I'm trying to think, we're trying to get Kim Harrison on. and she basically writes like the whole werewolf, vampire, gothic genre, like westerns.
Mhm.
And that's one way that basically she's telling the exact same story, but it's not something anybody had thought of before. Therefore, it's fresh.
Yeah, I like that.
Let's see. Nurse Wicked asks, now that you're in New Zealand, do you find that creepypastas are more of an American thing, or are they global?
Oh, okay. The weirdest thing about moving all the way across the world, as far as it could possibly go, is that I landed and I immediately got off the plane and went to a McDonald's in the airport, across from a Starbucks, next to a Burger King. People on their iPhones. I mentioned a creepypasta. I mentioned Reddit. People are like, "Oh yeah, I love Reddit. I love creepypastas." So the world community, like of people, I would say 50 or 60, and I don't know 60, but 50 and younger, we are so cohesive. It is shocking. Like the first 2-3 weeks I spent at a mall, I literally forgot I was in New Zealand because it is exactly like the mall from Columbus, Ohio. It's exactly like malls I went to in California and in Canada. Um, the internet culture, like the commercialization of businesses, it's all just completely unified everything. And when I mentioned Reddit and No Sleep and creepypastas here, especially my coworkers who are all like work at a video game company as well, they all know exactly what I'm talking about, and it's kind of disturbing. I thought that life would be dramatically different here, and it is in terms of the fact that people in New Zealand are extremely nice and laid back, and everything closes at 6 p.m. and they go home and actually be with their families. But other than that, everyone here knows what I'm talking about when I mention anything. No one has ever once said to me, "Oh, what is that? Must be an American thing."
So now you moved to New Zealand for the employment opportunity with a gaming company. Is that correct?
Yeah, for the job. And I like to tell this little story too because I was already playing the game. It was my favorite game, and someone sent me a link. Like a friend sent me a link, like, "Hey, look, they posted for a job here for a writer," and the job posting said, "We are looking for someone who both plays computer games, and is also an independent, self-motivated writer who specializes in vast dark universes filled with interconnecting pieces, like sort of in the H.P. Lovecraft style, possibly." And I was like, did you just like find me on the internet and write this paragraph about me?"
So
It was
now I have to admit I'm not much of a gamer. What's the game that you're working on?
I work for the game Path of Exile, which is sort of like the modern Diablo clone. We actually have like a new league launching on Friday. I'll plug that a little bit then. But
Oh, sure.
I actually absolutely love working there. They have so much freedom here. I will say the corporate world is extremely different from the States, because in the States I almost got traumatized by, the corporation looking over your shoulder, like watching everything that you do. That sort of like, I don't know how to say backstabby culture, but just like everyone's always on edge. Here, everyone's so extremely nice. I haven't not been once told any expectations or rules to the point where I kind of got Stockholm syndrome. I'm like, can somebody please get mad at me and tell me what to do?
So, you get to write the branching stories, or are you part of the writer's room about what the main concept is, or?
I wish they had a writer's room. I think they did not have an actual writer before me. I think they had a outsourced contract, no, freelancer. They had like a freelancer they worked with. So I'm a first full-time in-house writer, and it's definitely interesting having the people around me over the course of the last year start to figure out how to work with me, because I don't think that they had a person. Literally, I sit next to them now, and so at first we didn't talk much, and now they like turn and go, "Oh, like how's the story progressing on so and so?" And I worked for myself for 10 years before this, so I'm not used to having people next to me either. And I'm like, oh, there's a physical person next to me asking me how the story is going. Let me find a document for you. So it's actually a fantastic place to work.
Do you get any say as far as the character designs?
I I'm able to have conversations with people. It's like the whole company is like this giant pool of like 100 plus creative types. We're just kind of like thrown together and there are clusters. And so like if I go to someone and say, "Hey, I have this idea for this cool monster or this character," I can absolutely get that done. And yeah, I would say like it's actually really rewarding.
Well, I'm taking a look at it, and Steam's got it ranked 9 out of 10, and the Google users have a 91% approval rating on it. So you guys must be doing something right.
Oh yeah, it's an incredible game. Still my favorite game of all time. Uh, I'm really lucky to be working for it. Basically, a dream job for me.
It looks like a sword. Well, you mentioned Diablo, so it looks like a sword and sorcery
Yeah,
kind of setup.
definitely homage to Diablo, sort of the successor, I think, of that series. I'm not going to say that Blizzard's been messing up, but there's not really a lot of competition right now.
Well, honestly, I played Warcraft for about 2 weeks, and I'm like, yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Warcraft was never for me. It was very bright and cheery, whereas Path of Exile is extremely gloomy and dark, and I am intent on keeping the story extremely dark. So that's where it's at.
and actually, Turish in the chat asked, um, how much sway do you have over the mythology in the game?
Basically 100%. Obviously, the bosses can override and stuff like that, but it is my absolute pleasure to be the number one like source of all the lore and mythology and get to piece it together and add all the flavor text and all the different story elements. And right now, actually, my main job is narrative designer for this massive rework of the entire game that's coming up called 4.0. And I have basically written the entire story for that many times over because it constantly changes as the company evolves and the ideas evolve. So I will make sure that that ends up incredible, as much as I can.
And is there any difference to when you approach a storyline for a video game as you're approaching a storyline for one of your novels?
Oh man, yes. When I write a story, I just write the story. I sit down and 10,000 words will flow out of me in this incredible day of drinking coffee and then drinking beer or something and just like it's like screaming, "Get this out of me!" And in a video game company, I'll write I started out writing massive documents just like that. Nobody read them at all. That's not how this works. um, then I slowly, like over the last year, worked out this process where I team up with an artist and I'll write like a sentence or two sentences and he'll find images to pair with that. We turn this into a little card and the card will say first moment. And so people who are not writers, the people, because it's mostly artists actually, like level designers, monster creators, they will see this card and they get it. They get the first moment. They're like, "Oh, the character wakes up on a beach and this is what he sees." Okay. And that's how I have to communicate almost as much in pictures as in text, instead of like a 10-page document, because nobody reads 10-page documents. They don't got time for that. So it's dramatically different. And it's a step-by-step iterative process of like, "You guys all like this first moment card? All right. Are we going with this first moment card?" And they can all say yes. And then, a week later, some other department or someone higher up says, "Oh no, we can't do it that way. We have to completely change it all over again, repeatedly." So it's a game of negotiation, kind of like those card games where you're like always constantly like negotiating with other people to try to better your hand. And it's only locked in on that final day when everything goes live, because it can't be changed after that. And even then, maybe we change it later. So it's definitely an interesting process.
Well, I'm gonna and I'm gonna ask this loaded question because gamers have changed. When I was gaming, it was definitively a matter of skill because it was stand up arcade. Uh, how important would you say percentage-wise that story is to a successful game?
To games in general, very difficult to say. But for this specific genre, I'd say 80% of the character or 80% of the players don't care at all because they're there to play the game, and they actually say things on Reddit like, "Oh, this game has a story," and I'm like, "Thanks, bro." But the other 20% of the players, absolutely crucial, absolutely vital. They're listening to everything that's said. It's all sinking it in, it's absorbing into them, and they're like, "Oh man, this world is so alive and cool," or like, "Oh, that's this really dark story moment," or like, "I really hope that this character, gets some validation." And it's those people we're writing to, and they go so far as to like have whole discussion threads on it, compile all of the game's existing lore into easy to read documents to share with each other. And I don't know if any of them would be here listening to this, but I see all of that stuff, and I'm fully aware of those conversations, and we will not let you down.
And I'll be honest with you. Recently, my favorite online massive came back, which was City of Heroes, and
Heroes.
and the thing that attracted me to City of Heroes was the fact that there were stories, that there were things that you could follow, that it just wasn't a run-in hack and slash thing. So I'm surprised by you saying that. I would have thought it would have been like more like 40-60.
There are definitely games where the percentage of people who care about the story are higher. And, maybe I give them too much or not enough credit because that 80% of people who aren't fully up on the story, there's a whole continuum from like don't care at all to like, oh, that's neat if they ever notice it. But the genre, the hack and slash, better item, treadmill genre definitely favors people who are there for they put on music, they get into this flow, just destroying monsters, picking up items, and that's how they zone out from life, is the escapism. And there's a lot of, value to be had in that because I do that myself. Like as a player, I'm probably one of the biggest advocates at the company for players themselves. Because just because you work for a video game company doesn't mean you necessarily play the game, but it is so wonderful to be there and like a freelancer or a contractor suggests something, and I'm like, well, that's actually a great idea because as a player, I would really like that.
So besides Path of Exile, which we know you play, what are some of your other favorite games?
I actually run open source version of this, one of the first MMOs ever, called Meridian 59. So I spent a lot of creative time on that, basically like building that world out with story and content. And that's just actually, I think, something that got me hired at Grinding Gear Games is they saw that and they were like, well, this guy works on games and writes dark universes. Staff him up. That one and what do I always play? Super old games, generally like DOS games and very early Windows games, because the classics just had to focus on mechanics. Oh, StarCraft. StarCraft would be the other one.
Oh God, yeah. Okay, I'm old enough. I played StarCraft, so
yeah, StarCraft is amazing. That and Asheron's Call.
Oh my God, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's fun. Nurse Wicked asks, how do you feel about people who write fanfic about characters you wrote? Has that happened?
So, actually, it has, and honestly, 100% behind it, because it's a person out there engaging with the content, and people get sticklers about canon, like what's real, what isn't. And honestly, I don't think you can control that. I have never seen any single brand ever be completely under the control of one person's canon. And if they want to write fanfic, all more power to them. In fact, my subreddit where I post my stories, r/m59gar, is open to people doing that. And there's lots of people that have done that. So their stories are all still there. Like they've written stories set in my universe or about my characters. I love that stuff because it lets me see what other people are thinking, see stuff that I didn't have to create myself. So it's like a little gift of like, I get to experience my universe and my characters, but like I didn't make it. So I finally get to be a reader of it. and I actually kind of love it.
Yeah, that can be amazing. Um, Now, of course, have you ever considered after reading fanfic about being able to incorporate maybe an element or an aspect that the fans have written about?
Absolutely, although it gets a little bit tricky in terms of like rights and communication and so on. I don't avoid it, but it's definitely something that has to be carefully considered because I wouldn't just use somebody else's like fanfic idea because then you get into territory that can hurt a lot of people's feelings and if there's profits involved, that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, we know that result from what just recently happened with the Friday the 13th game.
Oh yeah.
But now, one of the things that I constantly harp about, that I always talk about, is a little acronym that I made up called flexing your pec, which means PEC stands for you have to have passion for what you do.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make the effort to actually do it. And you've got to be committed to see it to the very end. How would you, in those stunted terms, how would you say that functions with your life and what you do?
Well, I usually say 8 years ago, but now it's more like 12. I was working at a financial company, and you make pretty good money at a financial company. I was just out of business school, and I was also writing. And I one day looked at my bank account or whatnot, and I saw that the paycheck from the writing and the paycheck from the bank account were the same amount. And so I was like, whoa, like my mind just broke in half on that day because your whole life everyone's like, haha, you don't really make money as an author. And I'm like, and I knew that it was sort of a wave. It was right about the time that Amazon really hit ebooks. I knew that it wasn't like a permanent thing, that I was getting way more returns than I should have for the effort put in. So I was just kind of writing at home because I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
But it still broke my brain. And I think, like you said, like awakening that passion of like, whoa, could this actually be real life? And it was the scariest thing ever. But I literally left a cushy financial job to just go write for myself for, I guess, the next 10 years. And there were times when I had $0 in that bank account, and I was like, well, selling gold in online games. Don't tell my bosses, but to get by, to pay the bills. And at no point did I ever consider not doing this, because once I was working for myself and writing stories I wanted to write and actually making money from it, there's no way to go back. You cannot go back. The only way in the world I've ever gotten back into an office is when my freaking dream job in New Zealand offered me like here, work for your favorite game. I'm like, you know what? I gotta do this. And yeah, you got to stick it out. You can't let the numbers in your bank account scare you out of doing something. Like you just got to keep doing it. And I'm so glad that I did, because that's like, honestly, writing and all the stories I've created, they are the passionate core of my life. If I hadn't made these, I don't know, I would feel empty.
I mean, those are beautiful words, because I think, who was it who said, if you're doing what you love, it will never become an actual job.
Yeah, exactly.
And let me ask this, because you've been great with your time, and I know we're over the 2-hour mark, but I'm curious as to your reaction the first time that you heard one of your stories adapted. Which one was it, and what was your reaction to it once it finished?
I'm pretty sure it was Psychosis by a no-name YouTuber, and I don't say that negatively. Just I think they never got big. I think it was one of the only videos they ever did, but it was incredible to hear my own words on there, and I was thinking like, whoa, like this story is really good. Like, not to like, self-brag or whatever, but like actually get involved in it, because when it's someone else's voice and like the words were slightly different, because what people read on the page, is interpreted by their brain, and it's not exactly the words on the page, which I always found highly disconcerting until I got used to it. So it was like somebody doing a take on my story, slightly different, but like different voice, different tone, different feel. And I was able to actually get involved in it, get engaged with it in a new way. And I was like, wow, that's like really rewarding.
Yeah, I've found it amazing myself, and I've had the same thought. It's like, well, that's not what it was in my head, but this works.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's amazing, and I think it's also a testament of how good your writing is, of the fact that somebody would audio adapt it.
Yeah, I get tons of requests to do that basically constantly. I tell everybody, yes, like adapt everything you want. I am not here to like jealously guard my brand. Like I'll keep like the actual rights of the stories. Those are mine. I'll never give them away after all the horror stories I've seen.
Oh yeah.
But like anyone who wants to like audio or narrate, all I ask is honestly, and no one ever actually gets back to me. I say, send me your link when it's up and I'll share it on social media. So like I will send my readers to go be your viewers, and they'll say sure, and then they don't. And I'm like, come on, man. Like I'll send like 20,000 people your way between like Facebook and Twitter and my subreddit, and you just send me your link. So if you want to narrate my stuff, send me a link, and I will share it.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a better compliment, because I'm pretty much a low tech writer. Anything that anybody's really seen that's gotten out has been more of writing pieces for like newspapers, or writing writing something that's content generator creating. So I really enjoy the feedback. Do you find that this helps to kind of bridge the gap, because writing is pretty much an isolated craft?
What's interesting, and I think I have the advantage of timing and where I am in the world in terms of history, my writing is incredibly feedback heavy in terms of like I'll post a chapter and then like 10 or 20 comments get posted, and I read those comments as I'm writing the next chapter. And I don't know how much my readers are aware of that, but they help shape it. And so I think my stories are so much better for it. Like authors 50 years ago would never have had anything like this, where they actually have audience participation with each chapter. So that problem I described earlier of you can never get the ending to be right for all of your audience, not necessarily true if they're actually commenting on every step of the way. Because you can deliver that little piece every single one of them is looking for, because they literally write in the comments, I really hope that one character, makes it alive to the end. And I'm like, well, I got it in for you, buddy. I know the author.
Well, yeah, and I don't think it's like following the same premise that the writers of Lost did, because the writers of Lost were legitimately lost in the past 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And they pulled from every resource that they could to try to make something cohesive. Basically, what and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that there's some accents or highlights that your readers are putting to it, but not necessarily completely controlling what you're doing.
Right. It's the accents, the highlights, the tone of it all. And I love Lost, and I think you're absolutely right. They had the disadvantage of being in that era of the internet's like newness, where they probably got all the negativity and all the confusion and the fan theories, but they didn't get coherent feedback that they might these days. And I think that ultimately the problem came down to doing that one ultimate sin, is they changed genre on their audience in that last season. And if they had just not changed genre, it would have all been fine. There wouldn't have been that negative backlash. I mean, I liked the ending because I can recognize, oh, you're giving us a twist on the genre, and that's okay. I'll put down what I wanted to see, and I'll go with what you wanted to see. But a lot of people, they just wanted to see what they wanted to see, because you sold them for 5 seasons on this really cool, mysterious adventure, and then, totally different at the end.
Welcome to hell.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, or purgatory.
Yeah. Oh, spoilers. 10 years late.
Yeah, yeah. If you guys haven't kept up on that, either it's good or bad. That's all on you at this point. Um, now, I do like to I do like to leave the audience with our words of wisdom. So, for those out there who are budding writers, those people that feel passionate about it, but a little bit, they're in the rowboat of creativity and they don't have any oars. Um, how do you suggest that they get along? How do you suggest that they become the creative entity that they want to be?
I think it comes down to just putting something on a page. Write a single word. Just put the word blue on the page, and all of a sudden your brain will light up and you'll be like, well, what is blue? Or who is blue? Are they sad or is it a color? And then you write a single sentence and it's like, John was blue. Okay, John is sad. Why is John sad? And just keep doing that until you have one complete story. And you have one complete story, you're like, oh wow, that felt good. Or it didn't feel good and you're not really interested in being a writer. But if it did feel good, think about, wait, why did that feel good? Now, are there any other ideas that I could use to write another story? And I'll find a place. It's a phrase I often use: consistent production of quality content. If you can write one story a year, like 10-page story, sounds ridiculous, right? But if you write that 10-page story every, I don't know, June 6th, every year for the next 50 years, by the 20th year that you do this, you will have readers who are like, oh man, it's almost June 6th. Here comes that story. And then you apply that to, like, maybe it's monthly. Maybe you write a 10-page story every month. And then every month on the 6th, you got readers who are like, oh, it's the 6th. Here comes that story. That's how you build a reader base and become the writer that you want to be, is just consistently produce quality content the way that you want to do it. Even if it's a year in between, a month in between, just make sure that it's consistent and make sure that you tell people it's always going to be on this day. You know, that's just do it, and eventually it'll happen.
Yeah, nobody starts off like Wayne Gretzky wasn't automatically the best hockey player ever. There,
Yeah.
there had to be work. The old cliche. Well, cliches are true because of the fact that they happen on a regular basis, and writers write.
Yeah.
If you want to be a writer, if you're passionate about being a writer, write. You can't spend any time with doubts or I don't know if you've ever gone to like the writing seminars that they have like at bookstores and stuff where they're like where it's somebody you pay them $20 and they talk about writing for a class for like 4 hours worth, and they're not telling you anything that you shouldn't know already. There might be some nuanced stuff, but as far as it goes, your time that 4 hours would have been better spent with you at the PC or with a notepad in your hand.
But I do find the value of the class. Maybe it's not even necessarily the teacher telling you stuff, but it's the fact that you're surrounded by other writers, because that inspiration is contagious. Like when you get a bunch of writers in a room talking about writing, suddenly it's real. It's not just you thinking that you're going to write. You are going to write. You got to stick with that feeling.
I like writing circles. I don't like writing seminars, if that makes sense. Because the people who are in writer circles are incredibly passionate. I mean, think about the writing circle that H.P. Lovecraft had. I mean, holy God, he had what? He had Mary Shelley and Robert Ludlum and Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howard. I mean, these were people who were, basically fulfilling their passions. You don't want anyone to tell you. This is my personal take. You don't want anyone to tell you how you need to write. You just need to write, and then you'll figure it out as you go. It's kind of like unraveling the Gordian knot, and it's certainly going to take time.
That's actually a good point too. For the modern era, we are lucky in that the internet lets us reach a very specific audience. So you could be the worst writer in the world, but as long as you're true to your own voice, there is a sizable population of people out of 8 billion people on Earth looking for exactly what you're doing. And that is the weirdest realization ever, that like you could be writing like, I'm an author that exclusively writes about I don't know, squirrels on Pluto. Well, there are at least 100 people on Earth who want to read squirrels on Pluto stories, and the internet will let you find them because they're going to put squirrels on Pluto stories into Google, and you're going to come up as the number one result. And then suddenly you've got 100 diehard fans because you are literally their favorite author. And that is a realization that has helped at least 4 or 5 people I've worked with, because they thought no one would ever want to read their stories, but somebody does.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's, I guess it's the writer's rule 34.
Yeah.
You know, essentially, any genre that's out there, there is an audience for it.
Yeah, it's crucial to realize like that feeling of, oh, no one's going to want to read my writing. Well, yeah, there is somebody. You got to find him.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can say to new writers is, besides, don't come to me with an unfinished story, is put it out there, test the waters, because if you're doing writing just to build your ego, you're going to find yourself incredibly disappointed most of the time, because there are people out there who just want to rip you up, who just want to troll, who want to get that feeling of superiority, that, oh, well, I could have written this better, but they never will.
Yeah.
You have to satisfy yourself when it comes to your creativity, whether it's, sitting in front of a PC, sitting in front of a sketch pad or a potter's wheel. You just have to really enjoy what you do. You put the product out and you let it speak for itself. And I think you do an amazing job with that. I enjoy reading what I'm able to read from you, and I think the audio adaptation stories are amazing as well. And I'll say it once again: those of you who haven't tuned in to Psychosis, I know there's at least 4 or 5 different versions out there, but I'm going to recommend the one from Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, because I think Jeff Clements did a hell of a job as voice actor on that, and they also have a score and effects on it.
Jeff Clement is awesome, yeah.
Yeah, I like Jeff a lot. We're trying to get him on, but his kids are only available to him on Tuesdays. So, and real life is always greater than interwebs.
Oh, I got one more piece of advice. Actually, my partner here, she has poked me and passed me a note for the question about how to end a story that you can't figure out how to end for. So there's something that we worked out in our writer's circle, which I think is really sounds like a trick. You think about it, it really helps. So if you have an ending you can't finish, go back to the beginning and put some sort of simple opening thing on the front, right at the very front. And the prime example I use of this is, we had a friend who was writing about his main character who's a jerk, and he's unlikable, and he's just a total scumbag, and a whole series of events happens in this story that are all basically completely random. And he couldn't figure out an ending. He's like, what's the ending to this story of a jerk doing like 5 different things, and that's it? Okay, we go back to the beginning. At the beginning of the story, the jerk sees a homeless man. The homeless man asks for change, and the jerk says, no, like, get a job. And then that gives him his ending. At the ending, he sees the same homeless man. And the homeless man's like, hey, can I have some change? And the jerk's like, you know what? Sure. And gives him a coin. Like, oh my God. Like, now you have like a coherent story because you added this like single paragraph on both ends. You stuck at the end, go to the beginning and add something and just make those bookends. So now a person's reading this story, they're like, this jerk does 5 random things, but he's different now.
Yeah, I like my stories when they're cyclical.
Yeah.
But wow, we're coming up on the we're coming up on 10:30. Gosh, I certainly appreciate the time. Let me go ahead and get these plugs out here. Now, if you're looking for more of Matt's work, please feel free. Check out his Amazon authors page. There's also a Twitter and a Facebook. Now, those are located down in the descriptor. Also, if you want to play some of his writing, check out Path of Exile. Of course, all of my stuff's down there. You people know where it's at. I do also have down there my prescription for additional entertainment. These are smaller YouTubers that I like, that I watch, that I enjoy their content. And I encourage you to take a look at some of those links as well. I think you're going to find something that you like. If not, you get your money back, but the show was free anyway. And with that, I would like to thank Matt Dymerski for coming on. I think this was fascinating. I think we got into some of it, not all of it. If you're ever promoting anything, feel free to give us a ring up, and we'll get you back on, because I think there's a long road to travel. And
Absolutely.
And I think, honestly, personally, that you're doing it in style.
Great, thank you.
So I certainly like to thank our guest this evening. As far as coming up on the call sheet, we are going to have next week, Sir Adamantine is going to be here for an interview. We're also going to be interviewing the voice of Court TV, Steve Taylor. And then to finish up the month, we'll be speaking with our charity guy. Does a lot of great work, Disky Fringo. So thanks everybody for stopping in this evening. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your listenership. And of course, there's no prognosis. There's no diagnosis. Everything is all happy and healthy with our guest. So with that, I will just say the doctor's office is closed. Good night.